So, my parents divorced when I was 7 years old. I have an older brother who was 9 at the time of the divorce, and my mum got full custody of us. We would only see our dad every other weekend. My mum was a waitress, so she didn't have a steady income, and we struggled a lot. Because of that, we moved around frequently since we were constantly being evicted from our homes. When I was about 10 years old, we settled down in a home in the not-so-great part of town. Despite this, it was the biggest and nicest house we had ever had. It was also really cheap compared to the other places we had stayed in the years prior. But there were always creepy things that happened in this house. For instance, our TV in the living room would turn on and off by itself. One night, in fact, my brother and I were lying on the couch in our living room, just trying to go to sleep. This wasn't uncommon for us, as we slept in there many nights throughout our time there, and our TV came on as we were dozing off. Angrily, I got up and unplugged the TV from the wall, then sleepily crawled back onto the couch. A little while later, I could hear the faint static of the TV turning back on. I got up and went to unplug the TV, forgetting that I'd already done this previously. When I realized, I freaked out and pressed the power button on the TV to turn it back off. After that, I didn't sleep much that night. A few months passed by, and I'm lying in my bed this time. I'm not really trying to sleep, I'm just kind of lying there. It was really quiet in my room when, out of nowhere, I heard a tap on my window. It was like a tap you'd make with the pad of your finger, not your fingernail. I jumped off my bed and ran as fast as I could to my brother's room, which was right next to mine. I turned on his bedroom light and was hysterically trying to explain to him what had happened in my bedroom seconds prior. I was begging him to let me sleep in the room with him because I was afraid to be alone at this point. He agreed, and I got into his bed. After a few moments of lying there, we heard the same 2 taps on his window. Well, without saying a word, we both jumped out of bed and ran into our mum's room. We were crying and telling her what had just happened, and she had been asleep and was irritated that we woke her up. She groaned and told us that we were probably just hearing things and that we needed to go back to bed. But as soon as she finished her sentence, someone tapped on her window the exact same way they had done to my brother and me. My mum obviously shot up at this and told us that we could sleep with her that night. Somehow, we all managed to get to sleep that night with no further disturbances, but it was creepy. Another thing that happened was during the summer when my brother and I were home from school. My mum worked every day from around 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., so she would leave us at home with her boyfriend at the time. He was a nice guy, but he didn't really do much. He just stayed awake all night and slept all day long. It was early in the morning, and my brother and I were playing hide-and-seek tag. This is pretty much just hide-and-seek, but when you find the person, you have to tag them before it's their turn. We made sure to be as quiet as possible so we didn't wake my mum's boyfriend. I was the seeker, and I found my brother, but before I could tag him, he jumped up and ran outside. I chased after him and shut the door behind me. After a quick loop around the house, my brother went back inside. He stopped at the door, and I tagged him and laughed out, "You're it." He looked at me confused, and I asked, "What's wrong?" He looked at me and said, "The door's locked." I thought he was crazy and went to open the door, and sure enough, it was locked. But it wasn't locked by the knob. The deadbolt was locked, something that could only be done from the inside. We ran to my mum's bedroom and banged on the window, trying to wake up her boyfriend. He was a heavy sleeper and actually never woke up to let us in. Hours passed, and my mum came home and let us into the house. My mum had also told me that there were some nights when she was sleeping in bed and she would hear my brother screaming his lungs out for her, as if he had just seen something terrifying. My mum would jump up and run into his room, only to realize that we were at our dad's house for the weekend. She said this happened to her multiple times, too. One night at around 3 a.m., we were all in our bedrooms, sleeping soundly, but were woken up by a loud crash in our storage room. We all slowly tiptoed out of our rooms to find all of our Christmas ornaments broken on the floor. We had been staying here for over 6 months by this point, and our storage tubs were stacked neatly. In the storage room, we also didn't have a cat or any other animal that could have knocked them over. We had carpet, not hardwood, so all of the ornaments being shattered seemed really unusual. Well, we cleaned up the broken pieces and just went back to bed. The last thing that happened in that house before we moved out was actually while we were on vacation. My mum had a friend who let us stay over while we were gone for a week. He didn't have a house of his own and sort of just hopped from couch to couch, so this made sense for him to stay over. About halfway through the week, my mum received a text from him that read, "I'm sorry, but I can't stay here anymore." My mum walked into another room and called him to ask what was going on. After their conversation, my mum explained to us that her friend was sitting on her bed in her bedroom, with the door cracked open. He said that he had heard a noise and looked through the crack of the door and saw a little girl looking back at him. He said that he got up to check it out, thinking he was seeing things. When he opened the door, he saw the little girl running away from him. She was apparently wearing a white dress, and he said she didn't look scared, more like she was laughing, and it looked almost as if she was trying to play hide and seek with him. But after that, he just packed his bag and left, and I never saw him again after that. We moved out of that house, and nothing has happened to us since then. Surprisingly enough, we actually know the people who live in that house today. They have said that they've experienced some weird things, but they haven't really gone into detail about it. All I can say is that I'm just happy I'm not living there anymore. My uncle had always told me about some strange things happening in my grandmother's house when he spent the night. But first, I'm going to talk about his experience and then mine. I'll try to keep this short, to give some backstory on why this house is so haunted. My grandmother has had 2 miscarriages, 1 boy, 1 girl, and her husband, aka my grandfather, passed around the time that this all started happening. My uncle would tell me of events, like pots smashing together to wake them up in the middle of the night and seeing shadows and all sorts of stuff. But his most memorable experience was when he was making food around 10 p.m. He asked my little cousin if she wanted any food. With the living room being right down the hall from the kitchen, he heard a reply, "Yes." So, he started making the food and asked if she wanted him to bring it over to her. Another faint yes was heard again. He brought the plate down the hallway to the living room, only to find her dead asleep on the couch. He woke her up, asking if she had been talking to him the whole time, and she replied, "No, why?" Still groggy from just being woken up. This obviously sent shivers down his spine. Now, my experience. My cousin and I had spent the night together at my grandmother's house to keep her company so she wouldn't have to be alone there. We went outside for a quick smoke and then went back in to finally get some sleep. He slept upstairs while I slept downstairs. I turned the TV on for some background noise and passed out on the couch. It was around 2 a.m. when I was woken up to the sound of people whispering from the kitchen. Let me remind you that I was asleep on the couch in the living room, which is down the hall from the kitchen. being the curious 17-year-old that I was. At the time, I decided to see who was awake and what they were doing. The closer I got to the kitchen, the louder the whispers seemed to get. As I stepped into the kitchen, the whispers just stopped, and I was left alone with only the sound of my breath. I could have sworn I heard people talking in here, though, I thought to myself. I decided to look around the house a little more to make sure it wasn't coming from a different room. After every room being empty, I just decided to brush it off and head back to the couch. I only made it halfway down the hallway to the living room when I started hearing the whispers again. I couldn't make out any words. It just sounded like a group of people talking together in a low voice. I decided to turn around one last time, and again the whispers stopped, leaving me in the kitchen by myself. At this point, I was freaking out pretty bad, but decided to just hurry up and get through the night by turning up the volume on the TV. After a little while, I ended up falling asleep until the next morning. When I woke up, I told everyone about what had happened, and to be honest, no one was surprised. My grandmother's house is pretty notorious for events like this. To this day, I still wonder where the whispers were coming from. I don't know what happened that night, but I can't help but think it was spirits or something. When I was around 11, I had awful nightmares, recurring nightmares, in fact about a terrifying character. They would always start the same. I would be doing something that brought me intense joy, though I can't really remember those parts. At the height of that feeling, something would happen, something out of a slasher film. I was absolutely terrified of anything bloody or insidious as a child. I remember my brother and sister actually sat me down to try and watch an episode of Family Guy to normalize that humor for me. But it was an episode where Peter and the chicken fought, and it was extremely bloody and violent. I just lost it. I say this so you know, I got disturbed very easily back then. But back to the dream for now. After something extremely satisfying would begin to conclude, a loud bass hum would fill the air, and everyone around me would become instilled with what I can only describe as primal fear. The looks on their faces would make me fall down and sob. I would cover my eyes and hear a slaughterhouse around me, pilling of blood and sharp pain from head-splitting shrieks and cries. It was just honestly so horrifying. After a short moment of listening to my friends and family get murdered, the bass hum would stop, and I'd hear someone running around, quietly snickering to itself. It was as if a child was running around playing hide-and-go-seek or something. Then I'd hear complete silence as their feet would slowly form to the carpet or whatever surface it was on. But this dream usually took place in many different places as they walked towards my backside. It would always stop at least 3 feet behind me, but I don't know why. After some haunting silence, they'd speak, but it was always a different line. Here's a couple that I remember. I'm sorry, yeah, we've all heard it. I love my name, but let's just say it's Rob. Sorry, I'm busy. And this one, which the voice would say a lot. So, is it Sunday yet? He would say something along with that. Sometimes, but I don't really remember now. His voice sounded like an older guy deepening his voice, but also talking in a kind of childish tone, or just being a little goofy. It wasn't too deep, and it was also a little scratchy. After that, I'd wake up around 2 or 4 in the morning, unless I stayed up all night, in which case I'd wake up pretty late. This all happened for a while, probably around 2 or 3 months. But when you're dealing with that stuff, it usually just feels longer. It was also a long time ago, so it was probably shorter than that, but I'm not too sure. It didn't stop abruptly, though. I just had the dreams less and less, and it really messed me up as a kid and kind of changed me. It didn't turn me into a different person or anything. I just got much more serious and paranoid after that, which eventually went away. Now I come to my actual experience. This was around 2 years ago. I think I was living with my mum in an apartment, and I had just gone to the movies with 3 of my friends. We didn't really enjoy the movie and left early to head to my place. We arrived and all of us kind of slumped onto the furniture in the bedroom because we had walked back. As we sat down and I turned the TV on for my friends, I heard faint talking in the back, but my mum was home, so I didn't think much about it. We put on a Paranormal Activity show because we actually enjoyed that movie. But really, we just sat and talked and joked mostly. It was honestly a great night, and I liked a girl who was there, a friend of mine, and we were really hitting it off all night. But in the middle of us joking about the movie, I heard my mum call me. I hushed my friends and paused the movie and yelled, "What, Ma?" There was no answer, so I yelled louder, "Ma, what?" There was no answer again. So I got up and went to the entrance of the hallway, intent on going to my mother's room to express my annoyance for having to get up and see her. But I stopped at the hallway because I heard a weird guttural sound. From the back, the sound also echoed, so I knew it was from the bathroom. I yelled, "Mum, are you in the bathroom?" And my friends laughed at this. Then I recognized the voice, and I remembered my mum was in Chico for the night. I stopped, and I'm sure I had that same look as the ones I remembered in my dreams. My friends thought I was just messing around, like I just saw my mum come out of the shower or something. But then the voice spoke loud enough for them to hear, and I'll never forget what it said. It was kind of a jumbled mess, but the voice said, "Yeah, tonight I'll pick you up, then I'll rip you in half. But how? How, Rob, will know. But no, how? How forget?" During that whole dialogue, I told my friends that we need to leave now. I rushed outside as they looked dumbfounded and confused. That last word was the last thing I heard as I slammed the door, too, and I'm sure it would have continued. I ran to the street and called my mum, and she told me to call the police, so I did. They showed up and did their usual thing, and then just left. Obviously, there wasn't anything in the house. They told us it was late, but that doesn't mean it wasn't our neighbors. I wanted to believe that, too, but I swear it sounded exactly like what I heard when I was a kid, and I swear it was definitely in my bathroom. Well, after that, my friends told me it was fine, and they all went home, hiding how scared they were, probably trying to make me feel better or something. I knew, too, because my best friend was supposed to stay over, but all of a sudden his mum needed him to do stuff at 12 at night. I began to have the dream that night again, and I forced myself awake just as I heard that bass hum. I ran for the lights and didn't sleep much for the next week and a half, but I haven't had that dream since. I know I might sound crazy, but I know I heard that thing at my house, and I know for sure my friends heard it. I'll get started with a little bit about myself. I'm 19 years old and currently live in the UK. Previously, I was an extreme skeptic of all things supernatural. Ghosts and demons and all those stories just never fazed me, as I could normally convince myself of a rational explanation. However, lately I've had strange experiences that seem to have changed the way I think, not about ghosts or that sort of stuff, but about aliens. You see, I've always had an underlying fear of grey aliens, but not an extreme phobia like arachnophobia, where sufferers can't even look at or hear about their feared creatures. In fact, I have an extreme interest in the concept of aliens and wish to believe they're real and we're not alone in the universe. However, something about the idea of grey aliens just presents me with an intense feeling of dread and despair when I think about them in my own life. I can't sleep being able to see outside or facing anything with a corner I cannot see around. I also find it difficult to sleep without any kind of sound to distract myself and help me doze off without much thought now. Approximately 3 months ago, I encountered my first ever night terror. These were common for my dad, who experienced them for years. His night terrors, however, were generally funny, like him seeing my nan's eyes glowing neon, which woke him up screaming. My only night terror to date was very different. I lay in bed with my girlfriend and fell asleep, and I remember each part of the dream like it was real. I awoke in the same clothes, in the same sleeping position, with my curtains in the same position and everything. The curtains were slightly open, so I did struggle to sleep, but I didn't want to make a fuss and look like an idiot in front of her. A boyfriend who can't sleep because he's scared of the tiniest sight of the outside get-a-grip man. The only thing that happened in the dream was that I could see a face dead center in the gap in the window. It didn't move and it didn't blink. It just sort of floated there, looking at me. Whatever it wasn't human. Its face was long, almost shaped like a slice of pizza, rounded at the top and thinned down to a point at the bottom. It may have been blocked by the curtains, too, but this was all I could see, and as much as I wanted to see, to be honest. Its eyes were large, too large, black as night. No pupils, no movement, just there. But I could tell it was looking at me. I felt the same sense of dread that I do with my alien fear. Feelings of my heart sinking, an inability to move, and fear of what might be waiting around each corner. I awoke hyperventilating, in fact, the same hyperventilating I encountered. At the end of my dream, my girlfriend woke me up in fear of what was going on with me, but I just shrugged it off as a nightmare ever since. Those strange things have been occurring in the house. My family had reported strange things happening before, but my lack of experiences led me to believe they were explainable. Things like a lack of balance or wind from outside, the usual. My mother claimed she had seen a man look at her through the doorway of our living room but disappear when she looked directly at the area. She and my brother's girlfriend also experienced the same dream on the same night, talking to twin girls by each of their respective bedsides. My brother and sister claimed to see shadows run past doorways, and my father claimed curtains moved on their own with no windows open. I never truly believed these claims until my experiences started. Since that night terror, weird things have been happening around the home, which, to be honest, really terrify me. Items have flown from sides we could not see but were impossible to fall. Entire books, weighing upwards of 1 kilogram, fell to the floor despite being completely on the side with no parts over the edge. Loud bangs were heard at night from downstairs. That scared our animals and sounded like gunshots, but nothing moved upon investigation. As I live in the UK, it's also extremely difficult to get hold of firearms, and nobody, as far as I know, in our local area has even held a rifle, let alone shot one in their house. Our cat continues to look at things that just aren't there, following them around rooms with their eyes dilated to the maximum level, looking at nothing. Knocking has been heard at our back door, too, which is made entirely of glass, meaning we would see anyone who did it. Our technology constantly bugs out, with lights flickering constantly. Light bulbs lasting no longer than a few weeks at most. and Wi-Fi in our home being ineffective despite constant upgrades and extenders. It almost feels as if something is blocking electrical signals, especially in my room. As I plugged a cable straight into the router that connects to my Xbox 2 floors up, which one night was just pulled out from underneath my door despite being so tightly wrapped anywhere besides just outside my room that pulling on it from anywhere other than there would fail. The weirdest experience, though, was right after we heard the knocking on the back door. I retreated lazily up to my room to play video games. The top landing light was broken again, meaning it was not on, and no other upstairs room lights were turned on, with my door being shut. Suddenly, a bright blue flash occurred, as if it originated from my room, almost as if someone had used an extremely powerful torch that filled the entire floor for a second, despite my door being completely closed. I have no idea what these things mean, and I try to explain them away, but I feel as though each event just keeps drawing me back to that one night terror with that face that scared me to death. Even as I write this, I can feel that dread engulf me. I'm unable to stay calm, feeling as though around every corner something continues to peer around and watch my every moment. I just want to know what's wrong, to be honest. If it's psychological, then what can I do to fix it? I don't know. If it's aliens, like I believe it might be, but that dread I feel with the face, these events, and my previous feelings about aliens are one and the same. I want to know what I can do to make it stop. At the time this story took place, I was about 13 years old. My parents split when I was pretty young, and my mum had to provide for my sister and me. My mum is really honest and thorough with her work, so she found it rewarding to clean offices and houses for money. My sister and I often went with her to clean too, and by the time this story took place, we were pretty used to it. My mum had 3 buildings she cleaned regularly, which we came up with nicknames for: the main building, the red building, and the brick building. Brilliant, I know. We had to clean all 3 buildings that night, so we started with the red building. This, out of all the places I've ever been to help my mum, was my least favorite. I hated going there. It looked normal from the outside, but every time I took a step inside, I felt depressed and uneasy. It was like all the purpose of life had been sucked out of the world, and I just wanted to fall asleep. At this time, it had been a while since we had visited the red building, and there was this bathroom in the surveillance room that needed cleaning badly. The surveillance room was usually locked, and I had never been in this room. The first thing my sister and I noticed was the wall of monitors, each displaying the feed from the security cameras everywhere in the building. We had some fun playing around with the monitors, making one of us stay in the surveillance room while the others made faces in the camera in another room. I'd like to mention that my sister and I have a close relationship, and we've always just been weird. We laugh at jokes and stupid stuff, and we also like to scare each other. Anyway, our mum got on to us about goofing around and assigned us both some jobs. After about an hour and a half of scrubbing and vacuuming and whatnot, we were almost done. My mum was in the break room kitchen, and my sister was hovering somewhere nearby. I was extremely tired by this point and just wanted to lie down or do anything except work. I was watching my mum prepare the water to mop the kitchen with, when she asked me if I would like to mop or go turn off the lights upstairs. I was so exhausted that I was only thinking about not doing work. So I decided to turn off the lights and headed up the narrow stairs from the kitchen. The layout of the upstairs was odd, since it used to be an apartment building, but there are 2 sets of staircases on opposite sides of the building. I went up the ones in the kitchen. The other set was in the entryway of the front door. At the top of those stairs, there was this hallway that I always liked to avoid. I started turning off lights one by one, thinking about how we still had 2 other buildings to clean and that I needed to pull myself together. I blocked out my surroundings and was effortlessly flipping switches. The second I walked into the hallway I tried to avoid, I became a little more aware of what I was doing. Ever since I was little, I've been afraid of the dark. I started turning off the lights in the offices that surrounded the hallway. I got carried away in shutting off the lights, so when I reached the point to turn off the hallway lights, I jumped from a small step in an office doorway to the center of the hall. The hallway ceiling was really high, so the light switch was actually a string that dangled from it. I wrapped my hand around the string and pulled. As soon as the room went dark, I was filled with dread. Then I heard a very soft grunt coming from behind me. It sounded like when a person dies naturally and their body relaxes, so all the air in their lungs is released. As soon as I heard it, my whole body stiffened with fear and adrenaline, and I started to sweat. It felt like if I turned around, I was going to die, or something like whatever I saw, if I looked behind me, would consume me whole. I felt so powerless and terrified. I didn't know what to think, just that if I stayed there any longer, I was going to get hurt. My body took over my mind through adrenaline, and I ran down the stairs faster than I knew I could. I ran directly into the surveillance room, hoping my sister was in there, and called out her name. No response. I was so desperate and terrified that I ran over to the monitors and started scanning for anyone near me that I could run to. The first movement I saw was on the screen that showed the stairs I had just run down, and I saw my sister walking down them with her coat and Boba Fett hat on, with a mop in her hand. I took a deep breath and lay down on the couch in the surveillance room. I was so relieved that it was my sister. I knew she had just scared me, and she always did. It made perfect sense. I thought she mopped the kitchen and then followed me up the stairs and took the opportunity to scare me. After I calmed down, I walked into the kitchen where I saw my mum and sister talking. I leaned on the island counter and told my sister she scared me. She looked at me and asked, "What?" I repeated myself, and she asked when she scared me. I told her she came up behind me upstairs when I was turning off the light. I laughed and asked if I looked dumb running down the stairs. Both my mum and sister weren't laughing though. They were staring at me with confused faces. So I asked them what. My sister began to say she was downstairs talking to Mum ever since I walked up to turn the lights off. I told her I knew she was lying because I saw her on the cameras walking down the stairs. I described that I saw her holding a mop and wearing both her hat and coat. Then my mum chimed in that my sister wasn't lying and they really were talking. I began to think at this point that my mum was in on the joke too. So I told my sister to follow me to the surveillance room, and I pointed to the exact monitor I saw her walking down the stairs on. That was when she told me she took off her coat the second we walked into the building and hadn't put it back on since. She also only walked down those stairs once with the mop, but that was way earlier. I was confused and a little scared. When we packed up our things and got into the car, my sister told me what doppelgangers are. I never knew what they were before this, and I had never heard a story about them either, which only makes it more terrifying for me, to be honest. I thought of every way I could rationalize this, but nothing ever made sense. First, I thought, maybe the footage wasn't live, but then I remembered how my sister and I were playing with the cameras. Maybe I was just paranoid about the dark. but I do know for sure what I felt was real. I still don't fully understand what happened, and I wonder what would have happened if I had turned around instead of running. Anyway, I know some people are bound not to believe me, but I'm thankful for those who don't think I'm crazy because they've experienced the same thing. So, my father has had his fair share of strange and paranormal encounters in his lifetime so far. However, one experience that really stuck with him took place in 1982 when he was 13 and still living in the Philippines. He was attending school at Christ the King Missionary Seminary in Quezon City, a Roman Catholic institution that prepared students for priesthood. Obviously, my father never followed through with the program. Thank goodness, as he admitted he was never really serious about becoming a priest, and joining the seminary was just a means for him to live more independently. Apparently, this story is partly responsible for changing his mind. My father and his friends John, Rob, Richard, and Nick all attended the seminary, but none of them actually became priests either, go figure. Everything stemmed from when Nick got sick with the flu one time. He was quarantined in the seminary infirmary to prevent other students from getting sick, as was standard procedure. No one thought anything of it. It was when he was released 2 days later that things started getting weird. My dad explained that Nick came back acting abnormally reserved and quiet. Instead of laughing and joking around in the mess hall, he would just stay silent sometimes, with his head down, sometimes staring blankly at the window, never looking at or talking to anyone. One day during lunch, my dad and the rest of the group noticed tears running down Nick's face as he quietly cried at the table, head still down and refusing to talk to anyone. Concerned, my dad and his friends notified one of the seminary regents, sort of like a cross between a youth leader and Ayn Rand. Nick was summoned into the regent's office. The group approached the regent afterward, asking what was up with Nick and if he was okay. The regent explained that after asking Nick what was wrong, Nick finally admitted, "There's this man who's following me." And I didn't want to say anything because I didn't think anyone would believe me. Nick was then asked to describe the man, and he explained that the man was wearing a pair of jeans but was shirtless and apparently had no face. According to the regent, after Nick described what the man looked like, he completely and sobbing, yelling things like, "I really don't want to see him anymore. Please, I don't want to see him. Just help me. Please help me." The regent, along with the prefect who was sort of like a school principal and a priest who was also present, had to hold Nick down as he was completely distraught. After praying for a bit, they calmed Nick down and assured him they'd always be available if he needed anything before dismissing him. Although disturbed by the incident, my father initially thought excessive stress might have caused his friend's outburst. However, it should be noted that the possibility of ghosts, demons, and other malicious entities was no surprise to the seminarians, as new students were always warned that because the seminary was a house of reformation and students were preparing to carry out God's work, resistance from opposing entities wanting to drive out students was common and expected. Either way, my dad and the group gave Nick space for the next couple of days, assuming he wanted to be alone until he felt more like himself. That is, until the night things came to a head. Everyone was in their dorm rooms, and Nick, my father, and their friend Richard had their beds situated right next to each other. Everyone was setting up their mosquito nets and getting ready to sleep when a sudden shout from Nick startled everyone. He began yelling, "Get away from me." According to my father, his outcry was followed by 2 aggressive swings as Nick tried to fight off some unseen assailant. What happened next, my father still truly doesn't know what to believe. He watched as Nick's head whipped back as if struck by a blow to the jaw, and then his whole body was forcefully thrown into the air. My father, although somewhat religious, is still fairly skeptical, and he claims the way Nick's body was shoved back seemed genuine, with no bend to his knees to justify jumping. If it was all in his head, then Nick was a really good actor. But the night only got stranger from there. As soon as Nick was struck by this unseen force, he got knocked unconscious, and the regent was called immediately, followed by the prefect and priest. Together, they carried Nick into the regent's office. As disturbed and afraid as my father was, he, John, and Rob trailed behind, partly out of concern, but mainly out of plain, stupid curiosity. The doors to the regent's office were shut behind the group, and my father immediately regretted being so nosy. The room was incredibly tense and thick with fear. It was evident, even on the priest's face, that he was wary and reluctant to deal with Nick and a possible demon. The regent, prefect, and priest figured my dad and the group would stick around to help pray over him and regain consciousness. They quickly did as instructed and started praying the rosary. As if the night wasn't creepy enough, halfway through praying the Hail Mary, my father's friend John started talking complete gibberish, what my father could only explain as speaking in tongues. After this nonsensical outburst, John promptly collapsed. Luckily, the priest caught him and set him on the floor before he hit his head. At this point, my father was confused and terrified as hell, wishing he'd never joined the damn seminary, and could just be safe at home watching episodes of Three's Company with his dad. Of course, there wasn't much else they could do but continue praying and hope things got better. John regained consciousness shortly after, almost as if nothing happened, though noticeably confused. My father asked him what caused him to talk like that, to which John replied repeatedly, "I don't know." They finished praying after a while, and Nick was still unconscious. Deciding the group had done all they could, the regent, prefect, and priest agreed the boys should go back to their dorms and sleep, telling them Nick would stay in the office overnight, presumably to continue watching and praying over him, perhaps calling medical authorities. The group obeyed and returned to their dorm, rejoining the other students who were just as unnerved and unable to sleep from the night's events. My dad's friend Reggie, whose bed was next to his, meekly asked if they could share a bed, as he was too afraid to be alone, to which my father agreed. My dad remembers he and Reggie shaking so violently from fear that he could hear the bed frame shake as well, something he laughs about now. Despite being unsettled at the time, the next morning, Nick's parents picked him up for a 2-week leave. When he came back 2 weeks later, Nick was back to his normal self, and no one ever brought it up after that. A while after these events, long after my father and his friends left the seminary, Nick had a falling out with the group over personal issues, so my dad is no longer in contact with him. John is still a close family friend though, and my father sometimes brings this story up with him. He's considered extreme anxiety or paranoia and everything as possible explanations for what happened at the seminary. However, those are all just theories and don't fit all that well. It remains something my father still cannot fully explain. I mean, the fact that he had the flu could explain hallucinations, but the way my father describes that night when he was punched and thrown into the air, he still wonders about that. I'm from Canada, Alberta, and that's all I can really say. I have to keep things as private as possible. I've worked at this nursing home for about 1.5 years as a cleaner and food server. I usually work the late cleaning shifts, and as of late, I've had weird things happen. Things just keep regressing the longer I work here, and things are especially strange in one area of the building, particularly. I can assure you this is all 100% true. I used to be skeptical about things like this until I started working here. So, here's when it all started. I went in to do my late shift as any other day, but please note that I'm also pregnant in these stories. Late shifts include cleaning the dining rooms and kitchens and doing all the laundry from that day. Mind you, this is a really big old facility, and I'm working alone on late shifts. There are 2 dining rooms that can seat at least 70 people, 1 kitchen and 1 laundry room with those big industrial washers and dryers, so there's always lots of cleaning to do. I was doing my usual routine, sweeping the floors of the first dining room before mopping it, when I suddenly smelled a really bad odor. It made me sick to my stomach. I thought maybe the cooks had left some rotten meat in the trash can, but, to my surprise, all the garbages were cleaned out. I went back to the dining room to figure out where the smell was coming from and followed it, down past the kitchens into the hallway where the rooms are. This was the east wing of the building, and there are only 5 residents living in this area, which includes our laundry room. This wing is the older one that has yet to be renovated, so a lot of the rooms are empty. I followed the smell down the hall all the way to the empty room at the end of the hallway. I knew nobody lived there. I knew all my residents well and where they lived. This room is room 218. You could smell the foul odor emanating from the door. I assumed the cleaning ladies from the morning had left a trash bag full of rotten food in there or something. They often leave things behind while cleaning. No harm done. I thought I'd just throw it out myself. Because of fire safety policies at our facility, I had a master key that unlocked all the rooms. I unlocked the door and opened it, and the smell just hit me and almost made me puke right there. Covering my nose, I proceeded to walk into the room, and there was an immediate noticeable change in temperature. It was like the AC had been running in this room all day, and I had a terrible, uneasy feeling the whole time I was in there. Immediately wanted to leave. I searched the room quickly for anything that could be making the horrible smell, and I was confused when all there was an empty closet and bathroom. I thought maybe it could be a dead animal stuck in the wall, and I'd have to leave a note for my manager. I shut and locked the door and started down the hall. Suddenly, I heard a really loud knock against the door. A chill ran through my whole body as I turned around to face the door. I was sure nobody was in there, as I'd just been in there. Then I heard it again, but this time much louder twice, as hard on the door. In fact, I felt pale, being the pregnant and cowardly girl that I was. I began to run down the hall as fast as I could manage. I didn't know what or who the hell was going on with that room, but I felt I had a reason to be afraid. I got back to the kitchen fast and dialed 911 on the phone, as I was sure someone had broken in and was messing with me. I told the operator it was a possible break-in, and they told me there was a policeman on patrol 2 minutes away. I sighed at my luck and waited at the front doors. When the policeman finally showed up, I explained everything as I showed him the room. He went down the hall and cleared the room, telling me nobody was found and the room was still locked. Even the windows were untouched, and he said there was no smell. I was startled by this, because only a few minutes ago, I could have sworn I smelled rotting meat and heard the knocks. I ruled it out as my tiredness and pregnancy brain at the time. He took a report and went on his way. Mind you, I was still very uneasy as I finished my shift. But this was the first time I'd experienced anything paranormal. The second time, again. I was working the late shift one night, and I was in the laundry room finishing up the last bit of my shift. I was folding the laundry and caught in my own thoughts. This room has really large windows, and being late and dark, you can see your reflections in the surrounding room through the dark windows. I looked down at the laundry and looked back up, and my heart stopped as I saw an old man with black dark eyes staring back at me, smiling. I screamed and looked behind me, thinking it was a resident messing with me. To my horror, there was nobody there. I felt really uneasy as I looked around and out in the hall, but there was nobody there either. I said hello, but no answer. After that, I felt sick. I finished what laundry I had left and locked up the laundry room. As I was locking the door, I could see an elderly man standing at the end of the hallway in my peripheral vision. I turned to look, and it was the man who was just behind me a few minutes ago. He was smiling, eyes grey and black. I take note that he definitely isn't familiar. He's a tall, heavier man wearing jeans and a white t-shirt that's tucked in. He was bald and clearly elderly, just standing there smiling. The smile sent shivers down my spine. I thought maybe we got a new resident and my manager forgot to mention it. So I called out, hello, sir. Do you need anything? I'm Belle, and I'm working the night shift. It's nice to meet you. I managed under my intense anxiety, but he just stood there, smiling. If you need anything, feel free to call the staff phone, okay? I'll be over in no time. I was so very uneasy and just wanted to go back to the staff room. He just stood there, continuing to grin. I smiled back and waved nervously, saying, "Have a good night, sir, and feel free to call me if you need anything." I walked away in a hurry, and just as I got back to the staff room, the phone started blaring. I looked at the caller ID, and it's coming from 218. I felt really uneasy, but it must have been the new resident, so perhaps he was just too shy to talk to me. I hesitated and finally answered, "Hello, sir. How can I help you tonight?" There was a deep, crisp growl from the other end of the phone, and it didn't sound human at all. It scared the shit out of me, and then the phone went to static. Hello, I said nervously. The phone went to dial tone, and I sat there for I don't know how long with my heart pounding in my throat. Due to safety protocols, I had to go check on the resident. As much as my instincts told me to avoid him, I walked nervously down the east wing, my heart pounding in my ears. I came to room 218 and knocked on the door, asking if the person was okay, but no answer. I knocked again, still no answer. I became concerned. What if my resident was attacked by something? That growl definitely wasn't human, but I was also pregnant and didn't want to storm in and be attacked by God knows what. So I turned around to get the phone from the staff room, and then I heard the door creak open very slowly behind me. I walked over to the door slowly, and before pushing it open, I said, hello sir, are you all right in there? I pushed the door open at this point. I was expecting something or someone to jump out at me, but when I opened the door, there was nothing, no one in the room, and no belongings, implying someone lived there. It was completely empty, but I had a terrible feeling like I was being watched. I searched the room, and that smell of rotten meat filled my nose again. Then I heard the most terrifying laugh. It burst through my ears like knives. It was such a deep, low, cackling laugh. I literally pissed myself as I ran out of the room so fast. I didn't even bother to shut the door. As I was running, I thought to myself, am I going crazy? I could have sworn there was no one in there. I didn't see anyone. What the hell's going on? That night, I finished my shift quickly and walked the fuck out of there early. I didn't give a shit about spending one more minute there, but sadly, this is not where it ends. Due to being a soon-to-be single mum and pregnant, I had no other option but to stay here until I was on maternity leave, as my husband died a few months ago due to a drunk driver hitting him. He was supposed to come home that night to cook a meal and see my positive pregnancy test, and all that he didn't even get to know he was going to be a dad. Anyway, I was stuck there for a while, but that's where I'm going to leave it off for now. If you guys would like to hear more of my experiences, please be sure to leave a comment below, as I definitely have more than a few to share. Thanks for listening. So, I live in the UK and am a 21-year-old female. I run a B&B, and I'm pretty used to having to make weirdos feel welcome. However, they are mostly harmless at the end of the day. But last week's experience was by far the worst and most terrifying. It all started on Monday night of last week. It was the end of summer break, so a lot of tourists were traveling around my area, which was good business for the B&B staying. In one of the 7 rooms, I had a foreign couple and their baby. In another room, 2 girls who had traveled from Australia. And in the attic room, I had a lone man who, to be honest, I got bad vibes from the very beginning. He was tall, with long greasy hair and dirty, unkempt fingernails altogether. He just looked very disheveled. He didn't talk much either. He just asked what room he would be staying in, walked in there, and shut the door behind him. Still, nothing too out of the ordinary, in my opinion. Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. I spend most of my time in my personal hobby room. I mostly watch TV for a lot of the day and then go upstairs to my bedroom to sleep. I climbed the tall staircase and went to my room. I checked my alarm clock, and it was only 9:30 p.m, so I thought I might lie down and watch some videos on my computer. Halfway through watching my favorite movie, I was interrupted by a loud knocking on my door. It wasn't an average knock. It was really aggressive. I looked through the peephole and was surprised to see it was the strange man from the attic bedroom. I opened the door and he started talking straight at me, not letting me get a word in, telling me the water pipe in his room had burst and water was spurting everywhere, and he wanted me to fix it. I apologized and, without questioning anything, let him lead me to his attic room. But the first red flag was him shutting the door and locking it behind us. The next was that there was no water anywhere. Then I remembered there weren't actually any pipes in the attic. I don't know how I forgot, but I guess I was more worried about him asking for a refund than questioning if he was legitimate about the pipe burst. But now I was stuck, and the only other people staying were 2 floors below, so they would never hear me scream. I'm also a woman, so I had no chance of fighting off this guy. I looked at him, and he shot me a yellow grin and lurched for me, but I leaped out of the way. I noticed something sticking out of his jacket pocket. It was a knife handle. He ripped it out and started swiping at the air with it. I bolted out of there and heard him running at top speed behind me until we got to the 2nd floor, where I heard him run back up to his room. I locked myself in my room and called the police immediately. I also called the other guests on their landlines and told them to lock their doors and stay in their rooms. When the police arrived, they found the man hiding in the wardrobe in his room. I guess he freaked out when he heard the sirens and hid. Apparently, he only had one backpack containing a toothbrush, duct tape, a Stanley knife, a Phillips head screwdriver, and some intimate things I can't even write down, but I'm sure you can guess. They never found out for sure what he planned to do to me, but from the contents of his bag, we all had a pretty good idea. They took him away in cuffs, and thankfully, I've never seen him again. I plan on moving away soon because I don't feel comfortable with him knowing where I live. Also, every day I see that grin he gave me as he was taken away and his wild eyes. This is definitely the scariest experience I've ever had. So, this is a story my mum told me from her childhood. I've put it in my own words, but haven't changed any details of the events. Here it is. Memories are odd. Every time you reflect on one, you skew it just a bit, and after years, your memories become a disfigured version of what actually happened. It's like that grade school game telephone, where you whisper something to the person next to you, and they whisper what they think you said to the next, and by the time it gets back, the phrase is nothing like the original. I've often wondered how different my childhood was compared to how I remember it, how many details have changed, how many things I recall that may not have happened at all. I fully accept that not everything is as I think it was, and I'm fine with that. One memory, though, haunts me in vivid and precise brushstrokes. Funny how the ones you'd rather forget refuse to relinquish their clarity. The memory I'm referring to takes place in October 1986, just outside Dallas, Texas. I still remember the dress I was wearing, yellow with white polka dots, long sleeves, going all the way past my ankles, as per my parents' religious requirements. I hated that dress, but at 11, my parents didn't think I was capable of choosing appropriate attire. I hated it because it was hard to move in, and my mum made it herself. Fit was tight from mid-thigh down. Anyway, my sister, a bit older than me, had just gotten her driver's license and wanted to take the car out. My mum said she could as long as she took me with her. She agreed, grabbed the keys, and off we went. We left around 6-ish, and it was already getting dark, but my sister, uncomfortable behind the wheel, wanted to drive in the evening to have less traffic. The drive was fine at first, but about 30 minutes in, the car started sputtering. My sister pulled over, and we realized we were out of gas. This was before cell phones, so we couldn't call for help. We were on a rural road with no houses, nearby just fields and trees. My sister decided she'd walk to find a gas station, as she remembered passing one a few miles back. She told me to stay in the car, lock the doors, and not open them for anyone but her. I was scared, but agreed. She left, and I sat there in the dark, trying not to panic. Time passed, maybe an hour, or two, and I was getting really frightened. Then I heard a knock on the window. I looked up and saw a man in a police uniform standing there. He smiled and said he was an officer and asked if I needed help. Relieved, I rolled down the window a crack and explained we ran out of gas and my sister went for help. He said, "I see. So you're not out here all alone then?" Almost gleefully. "Yes, sir, just until my sister gets back." "And when will she be back?" "The closest station is a few miles away." "That could take a while, right?" My relief started dissipating as dread returned. "I don't know, she's been gone a couple hours. Now, I guess, he said. "Tell you what, why don't you come with me and we can go get your sister? You won't have to walk. How does that sound?" It hadn't dawned on me until then, but I realized I hadn't seen any headlights in either direction. For 20 minutes, I turned to look out the rear window and trembled as I confirmed no car in sight. "But where's your cop car?" I hesitantly asked. "Right over there, just through the trees." He pointed to the tree line in the distance. "Haven't you ever wanted to ride in a cop car?" "I think I should just wait here for my sister. She won't be much longer. Look, it's past curfew, and if you don't get home soon, I'll have to arrest you." Your parents won't like it if you get arrested, will they? A new fear entered my 11-year-old brain, the fear of arrest. But instinct said not to get out. I'm sorry, sir, I said, rolling up the window. I really should wait for my sister. As the window was about an inch from closing, he stuck his fingers through, trying to stop me, and I smashed them between the glass and door. He shrieked in pain, pulling his hand back. You little bitch, you smashed my fingers. Oh, I'm sorry, I said through the closed window, backing up in my seat as far as I could. He started pulling on the door handle violently, shaking the car. Open this door, you little shit. Do you know how long you'll go to jail for resisting arrest? He pulled out something like a nightstick and banged on the roof and window. He smacked the window again, and a spider web of cracks erupted. Now I knew it was only a matter of time before he got in, afraid he'd make things worse. Through frantic sobs, I said, okay. He suddenly calmed and said, well, all right then. Go ahead and step out of the vehicle and follow me to my car. Yes, sir. I stepped out and slowly began to follow him. I knew something wasn't right. All I could think was he was leading me into something unspeakable behind those trees. Wanted to run, but with my dress, I wouldn't make it far. Where would I go? We were halfway to the tree line, about 40 feet away, when headlights lit up the field. Come on, he snarled, grabbing my arm and pulling me faster. We were 10 or 15 feet from the trees when shouts started. The headlights beamed directly on us, like spotlights from heaven. Several female voices yelled, "Get away from that man, little girl. That man's not a police officer, he's a bad man. Let her go, you demon. God is watching you. Little girl, come here to us and get away from the bad man." They sent a barrage of shouts until the man let go and ran into the trees. They yelled for me to run to them as fast as I could, so I did, ripping my dress. 2 women in thigh-length dresses stood outside the open side doors of an old white church van. They urged me in, and I jumped inside into another woman's arms, hearing the door slam. There were 6 ladies all together, all older, larger women. "It's all right, sweetie. You're safe now. We won't let the bad man hurt you," one reassured. Through tears, I said I had to wait for my sister. They said they'd wait and keep the bad man away. Every so often, they'd tell me not to look out the window and pull me into their chest. But curiosity got my peered out. What I saw still haunts my nightmares. The man, now completely nude, running on all 4s in and out of the tree line and through the field. I don't know what he was doing, but he moved quickly and unnaturally. Sometimes he'd come a few feet from the van, making disturbing guttural grunts and growls. The ladies distracted me with nursery rhymes and gospel hymns, and any time he got too close, they'd roll down windows and shout him back. He disappeared and reappeared like clockwork until my sister appeared, gas can in hand, on the road behind us. I told my sister what happened. She said a worst feeling came over her, and she ran the whole way back. The ladies surrounded us, forming a circle around the car as my sister filled it with gas. The man was now standing 10 feet outside the tree line, clothes back on, watching silently as they told him to leave us alone. When the car started, the ladies said they'd follow to make sure we made it home. We went half a mile and made a U-turn to head back. As we passed where we'd been stranded, the man was on all 4s again, nude, sniffing the pavement. The church van was behind us almost the whole way home. I never took my eyes off it, afraid the bad man would get us without them. But as we turned onto our street, I lost sight they didn't turn in. nor did I see a vehicle pass on the cross street. Maybe they turned around and left, I thought. My mother was waiting on the front porch, obviously crying. She said she'd gotten an awful feeling something bad happened and we'd been gone long. I told her everything and she called the police, who took a statement. I thought that was the last I'd hear of the bad man. But a couple months later, I saw a news story about a girl missing from a park near where our car broke down. Witnesses said the last they saw her, she was talking to a tall man in an officer's uniform. Sometimes I think back on that night and shiver at the bad man. Other times, I think of the ladies in the van, how they showed up just in time and vanished without a trace. I wondered then, and still wondered now, if I was being protected. I'm not sure it sounds crazy, but man, what a weird night. The following account happened several years ago in Nepal. I traveled there with my sister M and two of her friends from high school. V&A, we'd hoped to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and immerse ourselves in the mystical mountain paradise too. Enjoy its culture and trek along one of the many Himalayan trails. However, limiting circumstances forced us to go during monsoon season. A combination of increasing heat and humidity resulting in almost incessant rains. As you can imagine, there was scarcely a tourist to be found, especially on the hiking tracks. Dense clouds snuffed out any meager light, and milky fog obscured the view more often than not as we trudged along the circuit. But we had a blast nonetheless. The track itself warrants a telling of its own, albeit far less serious, what with V falling victim to a battalion of bloodthirsty leeches lured out by the rain, and a getting entangled in escapades, nearly getting knocked out cold for flirting with a farmer's wife. Though battered and bruised, we emerged victorious and returned to the capital. Our flight back home was due the next morning, meaning we had only one day to explore Kathmandu. Kathmandu is quite a polarizing place, with labyrinthian streets and alleyways riddled with kitschy aesthetics and stimuli that push one's senses to their limits. Navigating Kathmandu by yourself, especially at night, is next to impossible. The heavily polluted air and suffocating traffic don't help either. Really, the only one among us who took a liking to the city was Vichy, was always big on everything South Asian and smitten by the various temples. Which is why, with strain leaking from our muscles and limbs jittering from our 2-week odyssey, we were dragged along and subjected to administrations on spiritualism and greater meaning. By the time we staggered out of our final sightseeing destination, the monkey template was almost dark. We kept casting apprehensive looks backward, prepared to fend off prowling gangs of thieving monkeys skittering in our wake, looking for any opportunity to dispossess us of food or the next best thing. One of the little buggers actually took off with my glasses. As we descended into the city, leaving the temple grounds, our luck got cursedly worse. We heard thunder echoing in the distance. Clouds, feathering alive, billowed up at an alarming rate, morphing from shades of purple to jet black flecked with lightning. It started raining heavy rain that pummeled us as we sought shelter. We splashed through ditches already knee-deep with rainwater and hurtled down alleyways, hiding under a tin roof at the side of the road, our drenched clothing clinging to our skin. Just as we were catching our breaths, a flurry of wet motion appeared in the corner of my eye. My sister M had darted onto the road, swinging her hands upward. She was always spontaneous and decisive, explosively so, and when she spotted distant white headlights barely discernible through the downpour, she gambled on it being a taxi, and it paid off. We clambered into the Suzuki with a collective sigh of relief the prospect of immediate shelter overshadowing the struggle to create space for our bags in the tiny vehicle. It was an impossibly tight fit, but we managed. The scruffy-headed driver, whose calm and deliberate tone weirded us out a bit, turned around in the near-pitch blackness of the taxi and asked with a toothy grin, "Where to?" We looked at each other in momentary confusion before realizing we hadn't accommodated this final day in Kathmandu into our plan. Due to unfamiliarity with the city, we had no idea what to say. The driver picked up on this and suggested taking us to his cousin's hostel, an excellent establishment, if he was to be believed. Out of options and utterly exhausted, we meekly consented. With thinly masked glee, he said we'd love it there. And the first round of drinks was on him. Careening through the streets, we tried responding to his prying small talk. But the hypnotic ding of rainfall on the roof was all it took. As I watched the blur of passing objects and people through the rain-streaked window-like wavy apparition's eye, plunged into sleep. When I woke, we were still in the car, and everybody else was asleep. In spite of piss-poor visibility and my grogginess, it was evident we were in a completely different part of the city. There was little street lighting, and all I could make out were jagged outlines of poles, looming concrete walls, and structures no people in sight. Unease crept up on me. How long had we been driving? Where was this person taking us? What quelled my suspicion and made us go along with such a shady plan was the perceived nature of Nepal's people. Every Nepali we encountered was welcoming and kind, which, along with the country's supposed safety, lulled us into false security. It hadn't occurred that this trust could be exploited. The driver noticed I was awake and flashed that toothy grin, saying it was good timing and to wake the others. When I stepped out onto the muddy, deserted street, unease slid through me again. A sentiment shared as we took in this cousin's hostel. We were taken aback. Mold-flecked walls with degraded renderings surrounded a house that, despite being camouflaged by darkness and rain, was unmistakably dilapidated. Granted, it was only marginally worse than Kathmandu's post-earthquake infrastructure, but it gave off a disconcerting air of ruin. In other words, no way in hell were we staying here. At least one of us was preparing to voice disapproval when the driver started bounding around, animatedly ushering us through the opened, rusted gate into the yard. We complied, but only to get out of the rain, now flooding alleyways and carrying swirling refuse. When we stepped inside, we met a carnival of disgusting imagery, illuminated by a single dim light bulb suspended from a tarp covering most of the yard. Revulsion and dread supplanted unease. It was beyond repulsive. What I can only describe as a sickening miasma covered everything, with a reek of foul odor making my eyes water. The concrete ground was littered with waste, walls smudged with caked dirt. The single plastic table was smeared with who knows what tanned, I kid you not, needles were scattered everywhere. We immediately knew we needed to get the hell out. But it was only when we turned and looked at the driver under the light that the seriousness dawned. This man looked like diseased roadkill. Sunken, bloodshot eyes staring from a face covered with livid sores and scratches. His toothy grin revealed decayed, cracked teeth. We were definitely in a drug addict's den. Holy shit, I thought, how did we not notice? I mean, you were sitting next to him. I wasn't sure how to react. He was blocking the gate, staring us down. He didn't pose much threat for of us against one frail meth head. Well, 3 at least. V scares easily, and glancing at her, she was visibly shaking. She'd be useless if things escalated. A, for all his loud bravado, was the first to bail when shit hit the fan. I was getting nervous. What if he had a weapon? A used syringe he'd lash out with? The last thing I wanted was contracting something. My mind raced. How to leave? No taxi. Within miles of this hellhole, and where were we? Phones useless with local numbers. I cursed my oblivious carelessness. As anxiety dissolved me, Em spoke up. Honestly, she was everything a leader could. Beelville-headed, perceptive and bolstered our confidence by taking control. She calmly addressed the driver, explaining we'd forgotten something and needed to rush back to town. We'd pay double the fare, but he wasn't having it. With wild gesticulations and irritated tone, he spoke rapidly. We barely comprehended in his frantic state. He said it was impossible to drive back under these conditions. Our best bet was to wait at the bar. He stressed multiple times the first round was on him, as if that enticed us. He pointed toward the house, and that's when we noticed the interior was completely dark. The wide doorless entrance, an ominous invitation into nothingness, threatening to swallow whoever approached. He told us to follow inside for drinks, waving, as if time was essence. He was riling me up. I felt like giving a verbal beatdown, but sensing that Em reacted. She kept level-headed and told him coolly we had no time. If he couldn't drive, help contact another taxi. He either didn't understand or ignored, urging us inside. No, it got to the point he repeated the same thing over and over, eyes dimmed to sickly grey, flesh sunk at his mouth sides. He kept insisting. With a hostile air, he looked like he was making a concerted effort not to lunge, fidgeting with shaking hands if necessary. I wouldn't have felt bad toppling him like a sack of laundry if he tried anything. V spurted out, unspiritually, "Fuck this, let's just leave." At this, he surprisingly went quiet, unsure what to do. Faced with departure, he turned and stared at the house, then back at us.